This is not all ego and hubris here. This is really about like reminding ourselves how fortunate we are every day that people come to our dining room. And each night we kind of get to earn the right to do that the next day again. And so all of these decisions are really made on behalf of our guests, our customers.
Hello and welcome back, or welcome to The Messy Middle, a podcast designed for people like you tired of chasing external methods to resolve our internal messiness. I'm your host, Andrew Horsfield. The purpose of this podcast is to have conversations with leaders and experts in their field who share personal and practical strategies that you can implement to advance your career, company, and life. You can find out more or listen to previous episodes at andrewhorsfield.com/podcast. Ben Shewry is head chef and owner of multi-award-winning restaurant in Melbourne, Attica. Attica offers guests an immersive experience that showcases Australia's unique cuisine and has been featured multiple times in the world's 50 best restaurants, won the Age Good Food Guide's Restaurant of the Year 3 times, and has also been named the best restaurant in Australia. Along with these awards, Ben himself has also won Chef of the Year twice, earned Attica 3 Michelin stars, and has been featured on the Netflix series Chef's Table. But even more impressive than this list of accolades and awards is the way that Ben chooses to lead and run the restaurant. Rejecting the stereotypical role of a head chef who stands at the pass yelling at people, Ben has built a high-performing workplace by expecting high standards from his staff while creating an inclusive environment where people want to come and work. I asked Ben to come on the podcast after reading his book, Uses for Obsession, a memoir of his experience in the hospitality industry that also offers valuable life lessons on every page. This is a conversation about more than food. It's about integrity, obsession, turning adversity into advantage, and how it's possible to succeed while maintaining a sense of self and humanity. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with the remarkably creative and one of the culinary world's most inspiring voices, Ben Shewry. Ben, welcome to The Messy Middle. It's so good to be able to talk with you, particularly after my wife and my experience on Friday night, which we'll talk about in a moment. But if my interviewing skills are half as good as your culinary skills, we'll have a rich and rewarding conversation. So welcome.
Thank you, Andrew. Nice to be here.
I just wanted to start off to say thank you for Friday night. My wife and I obviously dined at Attica. We had such a great experience. So it was wonderful. Thank you. Appreciated it.
Oh, thanks very much. No, I appreciate the support. It means a lot that you would come in. A lot of people kind of ask for things, interviews, recipes, time, but then really never actually show like a genuine interest.
I'd mentioned the book, Uses for Obsession. What really resonated for me was that it was almost like a manifesto for life about living and leading well. You said you're not necessarily prone to reflection. What prompted you to write your book?
I feel pretty strongly that all of this can't just be about me or us. This is bigger and it needs to be bigger. So you kind of need to be able to step off your life and look at it from a little bit of a distance and see that you're not just a pawn in the game, that, you know, the things that affect a person in their life, that they're not just so helpless. And if you can step back from the machine a little bit, you can kind of see what's happening and realize that it's happening to many people and not just yourself. And so within that view, I guess there's an idea that I had of writing a book which would be useful to people. Technically, it's a memoir, but it's also not really a memoir. It's not quite a manifesto either. But I suppose without wanting to push it into the self-help category, I did want it to be helpful and useful to people. When you've done a lot of media and you've been a part of a lot of projects where your life's been examined, like I have, you definitely want to bring something fresh to a book as well, not to tell the same old story that people might already know, people who follow you. And so I definitely wanted to avoid the pitfalls that a lot of memoir writers make, which is just to regurgitate you know, this was my life. This is where I grew up. Then I became successful, and that's the end of the story.
There's so many experiences you share in the book where you're either at impending disaster or in the middle of disaster, and that rawness and authenticity in itself is a lovely service to other people that you're mentioning. But where does your ability to turn adversity into advantage come from? Because you do that very often in the book.
It comes from the resilience of my upbringing in the backcountry of New Zealand with farming parents. Just as a small child witnessing, not only my parents, but the whole district, to varying degrees, just driving themselves through a natural disaster, whether it be flooding or that, there was the export price for lamb was very low, and it meant that maybe you were going to break even or lose money this year on the farm. Just catastrophe, like fluid catastrophe. But so much so that it was normalized, really, and you just got on with it. I seldom heard my parents complain. I don't think I ever heard them complain. And within that, there's probably a protective mechanism to not overshare with us children, and also just to kind of get on with it, and then being curious about it and applying that, not even really knowingly initially, to the early experience that I had here at Attica.
And tell us about that, because as context, you took on the head chef role there before obviously being an owner. You worked in the restaurant for a large period of time. Can you just talk us through that experience from your perspective?
Yeah, so I was 27, had a 6-month-old infant son, and was the main provider for the family, and just had to take a head chef position. I wasn't ready, and I wasn't that keen. We were finding it pretty tough financially as a family. And so I just applied for a job in the paper for a restaurant called Attica. I remember I had the interview. I wasn't sure if I was going to get it. It took them about 3 or 4 weeks to decide. And then I started here. The people in charge weren't exactly honest with me about the financial situation of the restaurant, which is not uncommon. And the restaurant was in grave danger of going bankrupt. And that I realized pretty soon after I started. And so it was a sort of a period of 10 years of kind of living pretty close to the edge as a business. It's hard to really understand fully what drove me to stick it out, because a lot of more able-minded people might have just said, you know what, this is ridiculous. You can't operate under these conditions. It's too stressful. You're working too many hours. But there was something within me, I think partially probably fear of failure, fear of being the person that was responsible, or felt responsible for the restaurant going bankrupt, even though, now being an owner myself of 10 years, I know that I wasn't responsible, but I felt responsible. And so I was really fully committed, more committed than the owner. I was just driven by a sense of wanting to create, my own language in cooking and make my mark, and, the sort of normal things that a young person wants to project on the world.
Looking back on it, sometimes hindsight's helpful. What would you tell that 27-year-old Ben, or even for people listening who are in their own messy middle? Is there anything you would say to them looking back on that experience that you would take away or advise yourself or other people?
I think that when things go wrong, a lot of us who are trying to do good work, there's an immediate sort of reaction that I have towards myself, and it's pretty rough and it's pretty vicious. And I'm not going to say it on the podcast because I do write about it in the book, but I can just be ruthless with myself internally. Nobody ever sees or hears that. And I have met a lot of people on the book tour, which has been over 70 events now, who have reflected upon their own experience to me and said that it was really valuable to read that, to feel that, they're not the only person that does that. So when I was younger, and I see it in my own son as well, being super tough on him and his chosen field, I wish there was something more that I could do to help, but I'm not sure that there is, other than to talk about it, to kind of bring it to light, to say, you know what, like, that's not super helpful to sort of chastise yourself so viciously, to put yourself down so badly. No matter what the failing was, tomorrow you get to try again. And that's really the point of it. Nobody goes through this and everything just happens for them. Nobody comes into leadership and is a great manager straight off the bat. Very few. I've never really met anybody, and I've trained probably over 100 managers here now. And they all struggle initially, until they start to find their rhythm. But then that process of trying to become a good manager or be a good leader, we can really bash ourselves. And I'm guilty of that myself. But I think reflecting upon it, writing about it, even, my advice to somebody that does it frequently is to actually write down what you're saying to yourself, because when those words are down on the page, they're a fair bit more shocking than when they're flying around in your head. If you actually kind of give it voice, maybe talk about it with a trusted confidant or mentor, it's helpful. When we keep it all cooped up, of course, it's not good.
Lovely to have those, as you say, mentors, and they can be formal mentors of people who have been in the role and can help guide through decisions, or, hey, I've been there before and this is what was helpful or not helpful. But having that person who will genuinely give of themselves to your own, and vice versa, of course, giving it to other people, is such a beautiful gift that we have in humanity when we find the right people around us.
Oh, it's an extraordinary gift. I couldn't agree more. It's maybe the most important thing in leadership and in business, maybe all of life, because I always feel like, my business mentors, I call them business mentors, but really these are things of life, not just of business, And I know that there's no way that I would be where I am today without, having these wonderful people. And I have to give myself some credit here as well, because I sought them out. I chose to work with really great people for less pay because I knew that they would teach me things that other people couldn't, because they were ahead of the curve. And then other times, I took a chance and reached out to somebody who I just met and said, I really admire what you've done. Would we be able to have a conversation? I wouldn't even ask them to be my business mentor. It's not like that. It's just could we have a conversation? And you'll find that if you ask the right person at the right time of their life, very few people will say no. And so most of my business mentors are significantly older than I am, so in their 70s, 60s, and they have that great passage of excellence and business and lessons, and they just get to, the marrow of the bone so much quicker than anybody else can who's kind of my age or at my level of experience. They just see it with such immediacy that it blows my mind, with such clarity. Yeah, just recently somebody approached us about doing another business, and we were like really tempted because it was a really good opportunity and they seemed really nice, but I kind of couldn't get past the fact that we didn't really know them. So I went to my business mentor and he's like, no, 100% no. And I went to him because he has had really successful partnership that's lasted more than 2 decades. And he has 5 partners, which to me is extraordinary. And they're all still really tight and successful. And he's like, I knew all those people for 4 to 5 years before I went into that partnership with them. And you've known these people for 2 weeks. He said a really foundationally important thing to me. He said, if the personal relationship breaks down, all that's left is business. And then business is boring. And I thought, wow, this is one of the world's most successful people. And I was like, wow, that's it right there. It's so clear. It wasn't even a conversation as long as this, really. Like, it was just there it is. There's the facts,
One of the things that really struck me as a through line through the book was your experience with David Thompson and just reaching out early in your career for a couple of reasons. One, to do exactly what you're talking about, that finding life is not in these big visions and purposes, but just in these moments of decision.
There's probably a point in time of all of our lives when wanted to do something, we haven't quite had the courage to commit to it because it's scary and we might face rejection. And so I'd booked a cooking class with David Thompson, who is one of the world's great chefs and was a real, he really specialized deeply in Thai cooking and lived in Thailand and studied it in a way that a lot of Westerners had never done before or since. And he was a hero to me. I was young, probably 25 years old. And I booked his cooking class and paid, and with the intention that I would not really to go to the cooking class, but to have an opportunity to ask him if I could do work experience with him. And when the time came after the cooking class to ask him if I could, I couldn't do it. And I left the cooking school and I walked down the road and I was swearing and cursing at myself for not having the courage to do it. So I turned around and went back in there and very quietly and humbly asked him if he would accept that. And he said, of course he would. And he gave me his email. And, I can't tell you what it meant or how it made my heart sing in that moment. I seldom felt more alive. And soon after that, I arranged to go to London where he was working and work in his kitchen for 5 weeks. I worked every day, every hour I could, and learned everything I could from him and his team, and subsequently went to Thailand after that. And he stayed in my life post that time, which is pretty amazing. And he's definitely been a mentor to me. He was a tremendous person. He's of a high intellect, and that's required to be able to meet the obligations of having some level of mastery of that cuisine. And he also is a very humorous person, and he didn't really discipline people with rage. He used humor to get people to meet his standards. And so it was sort of more of a playful environment. It really wasn't a stereotypical of the time kind of macho anger run kitchen. And that was a really different experience for me too. So I learned a lot from him, both on Thai cooking and culturally as well. And, I brought all of that experience to Attica when I started.
Can you just help us understand your decision-making process? How do you make those decisions about what's positive obsession and what's a waste of time, or what's going to be a good decision and what gets you into trouble because it's too much work and finessing? Is there a process that you have for that? Is it gut feel? Can you talk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, it's really coming from a gut feeling of experience, my directness. I think for me, it's sort of analyzing the bullshit is probably something that I would like to do pretty constantly. And everything that we do, it has to feel good to us, but it also has to make an impact on our guests. This is not all ego and hubris here. This is really about reminding ourselves how fortunate we are every day that people come to our dining room. And each night we kind of get to earn the right to do that the next day again. And so all of these decisions are really made on behalf of our guests, our customers. And so the way that I view it is quite simple. There's X amount of money that people spend. It's my responsibility to take that money, as an unspoken contract in my opinion, and make the most of it, to do the best work. And that means analyzing things and deciding what we think actually really matters to our guests and what has a real impact and what is just sort of ego or a massive waste of time, or overcomplicating things just because we can, because we're a big team. And restaurants of our ilk have a history of sort of overcomplicating things just for complication's sake. And so my view is that just because you can do something doesn't mean you should, and we've gotten pretty good at being direct and as direct as possible. And that is not only sort of in our expression to our customers, but in the responsibility that we have to the ingredients, to represent them in the best light possible, and also, of course, massively to our employees, that the work that they do is not soul-destroying. It's not to say that it will be easy, because it won't be easy, but it should enrich them, and they should learn things from it, and the things that they learn shouldn't be pointless. And if I come back again to my childhood, that's about directness. That's about everything falling away and a focus on the environment, the foods of that environment, from the farm, from the bush, from the landscape. And it's understanding acutely, Andrew, where the wealth really is. You know, the wealth is not quite what we think it is. The wealth is the joy of the experience, of being around the table, of eating good food. Even, you know, in my situation, I grew up without a lot of money, but we always felt wealthy in family spirit. And I've never forgotten that. So I can mask the work that I do here by using all of the traditional fine dining tropes that exist, you know, the highly polished silverware, the fancy ingredients like truffles and caviar and foie gras, the things that restaurants of this kind are sort of expected to serve, the incredibly stiff and impersonal formal service. All of those things just kind of mask the joy of what we're trying to do. They're not real, you know, and just trying to always kind of get to a directness, to say it in less. But in cooking, is everything that we're doing on the plate completely necessary? You know, is it adding to deliciousness? Is it adding to the story that we're trying to tell through the food? Or is it just kind of there because it looks pretty, or it will wow the guest temporarily? And so that conversation about whether things are necessary is really vital, I think, in expression and in business. Because if it doesn't make an impact, then it's sort of wasteful, and you could be using that resource, whether it be ingredients or time, somewhere else on behalf of your guests. That's the responsibility that I feel.
Probably leads me into asking you about, you know, what Attica's taught you about your own leadership and some of the things that you're aspiring to do. Tell us, you know, about that philosophy that you have and where that comes from and why it matters to you.
Well, first of all, that old standard is so well played in shows like The Bear and movies like The Menu and countless other ways. And when I came into that world, initially I tried to act out like that, behave like that, but it just didn't work for me. Honestly, I really couldn't kind of reconcile this idea that kitchens ruled and dominated by fear and anger and rage, that would lead to high performance. That doesn't make any sense. If you step back off that, objectively look at what's happening in that environment, a culture of fear and bullying and harassment, it's just not in line with any idea that I think that most people have of performance. In an environment which is filled with anger and fear, people are more prone to hide their mistakes for obvious reasons. And so you really want to be able to develop a culture where people are comfortable bringing their mistakes to you so that they don't get served to the customer. That's been my experience of those sorts of environments, being a worker within a big team, you know, with a bully for the boss, is that people are really, really reluctant to bring any mistakes because they know that they're going to get yelled and screamed at. And so they'll hide them until they get caught. And so there's a certain percentage of mistakes that are kind of in that environment that are constantly going through to the keeper. And so that to me is just not in line with my idea of performance. And so here there is no yelling, there is no swearing. It is intense because there are a lot of orders coming in. You know, we have to make a lot of food, but it's not fearful, and everybody's encouraged to bring their mistakes immediately to the person, the most senior person in the kitchen, so that we can quickly fix them together. You know, another thing that never happens here is that, you know, the newest staff member who's not quite up to speed with the work yet, they're never allowed to sort of fall down by themselves. People around them will always be helping them until they have had the education and the support to be working at the pace they need to be here. But in a traditional kitchen, if you can't keep up, nobody will help you. You'll just get further and further and further. We call it in the weeds, further and further behind, and you'll be left to fail isolated and completely by yourself. And for some people, that happens constantly, daily, and they're getting yelled at and screamed at, and they can't keep up. through no fault of their own, just because they haven't had the training, they haven't had the experience yet. It's very hard to watch that. It gives me a bad feeling even thinking about it. The idea that a team would let that happen to an individual just doesn't make any sense at all. That doesn't happen on the sporting field. You're only, like, there's that saying, I don't really like it, but like there's that saying, you're only as good as your weakest link. I don't like to think of anybody in our organization as a weak link, but there's some truth in that. I would just say that, perhaps you're only as good as your newest member of staff or your least experienced, and it's the responsibility of everybody more experienced to lift them up, show them the right way, support them, to help them make them feel secure so they can perform at the best level that they can. And so kind of this experience here across the decades has kind of taught me that, there's a real fundamentally important thing to me, which is that kindness is, always the older sibling of performance, because if you're kind and you have the right intentions, you just get a better result. And here that's been played out in many different ways. It comes from, a very strict, no bullying, no harassment policy that's lived out daily, that is also taught, educated, and those standards are actually upheld by not only myself and my wife, but by our team to the best of our ability, knowing that no workplace is perfect and no workplace is immune from those things. But it's something, you can't just sort of say, all right, guys, no visible anger, no bullying, no harassment. You can't just say it and expect that to be the case. You actually have to work on those, all of the standards that we're talking about. They have to be worked at daily. It's not just about having it on the wall or having it in a manual. It's about reminding people of their obligation daily, weekly, and having a whole heap of people on board with it, because not only is it good for individuals, but because it's results-based, it's performance-based. So even if, you're listening and perhaps you're not naturally a super empathetic person, I don't know, we all have different motivations of doing things. I'm saying working this way is performance-based, 100% performance-based. And so it's not, some people have viewed in our industry have sort of viewed what we've done, particularly not recently, but particularly at the beginning, as kind of namby-pamby. We were kind of criticized for being too soft, that we weren't going to be able to produce an elite product through this way, because the tradition had taught all of us that the only way to produce an elite product in a restaurant was through anger, through the old way, the way that you articulated. And it's been our learning that that's not only not true, people behaving like that are destroying other people, but also they are not reaching the level that they could be.
I love what you're talking about there, which is there's one thing to have this aspiration about how the restaurant will work and operate. Then the support systems and structures that sit beyond that, not just the policies and procedures, but the human mechanisms of support and encouragement. So can you share a little bit about that, how you create these exacting standards of Attica to deliver that fine dining experience whilst creating an environment where people want to work?
Yeah.
That's a really tricky balance.
It is. It's something that's sort of been set in perpetual motion. So I think starting it is harder than in some ways in maintaining it. But two things: if you punch up and you never punch down, then that's a good start. If people know that they matter to you, then that's a good thing. If you are prepared to be patient and teach whilst the business that you're building catches up with your ambition, then that's a really important and crucial thing. Because if you can't be, that's when the anger comes. And I'm speaking of my own experience even here. I really think that it all needs to feel to everybody like it's more than just a job, that it's more than work, that this really counts for something in the world. And that can't be a manufactured thing. There has to be a bit more than just money at play, whether that's income for the company or a wage for the employee. There has to be a few extra things. It can be the level of engagement with your customers. It can be the work that the company does in the community because it should. It can be the stands that you take as an owner on certain issues, whether it be environmental or social. People want to work at a place where it's more than just about making money, and it's not that making money is wrong. It's just that you can do more than one thing in business at the same time, I always sort of dislike the kind of win at all costs, kind of ruthless mentality of business as well. And I think that a bit of reflection upon the situation is good. To see the other person when somebody's done something wrong is good. To give people a second chance, to hold them accountable, to not let things go, because really holding people accountable in a respectful way is saying to them that I care about you, because this path that you're on, potentially, whatever thing that they've done, this path that you're on is not leading you to a successful life. So therefore, I'm going to hold you accountable on this, because I want you to succeed in life. I want you to succeed beyond this job. I don't own you. I appreciate that you're here. One of my responsibilities is to try to show you, to the best of my ability, the right way to go about it. Because we're going to be doing this for a long time. In most of our employees' cases, for another 30 years. If they stick in this career. So I do feel a pretty strong obligation to leave a mark on them, and to not only set them on the right path, but also show them the least of what they deserve, in terms of the standards that they should accept from future employers, but also the standards that they might set for the teams that they lead, and with that, we can grow an industry that feels more equitable and fairer than the one that we're inheriting.
I think that's a terrific reflection point for people, anyone, because we're all leaders. We're parents of kids. We're leaders of business. We're sports coaches. I do want to ask about the staff speeches before we wrap up, because I think it goes to what you're talking about now around why you started that and what impact they've had. Do you mind just talking about those and giving those some context for people listening?
In restaurants, there's an age-old conundrum, which is there's two teams, and lots of businesses have two teams. They have the sales, they have the marketing, or they have the sales and they have the warehouse. And often those teams, and in our business, those two teams are the kitchen and the front of house, the waiters and the chefs. And historically in our business, there's been a mistrust and a dislike even of each other. It probably goes as far back as restaurants do. That's because these two teams require very different skills, different personality types. Chefs don't have to expend a great deal of social energy on a daily basis, whereas waiters have to expend an incredible amount of social energy on a daily basis. And so much so that as a chef, I couldn't even imagine what that must be like. And so one is sort of a practical, physical job, still requires communication, and another is it's kind of more artistry, like I think balancing people's needs and personalities and moods, is very challenging. And so I have a lot of, really a lot of admiration for waiters. And as a chef, I thought about this age-old conundrum, this dislike, which on occasion would end up in fiery sort of circumstance when, let's say two people in the business who don't spend much time with each other suddenly come into a very high pressure moment during service. And because they don't know each other very well, they both get angry at each other and tempers flare and feelings are hurt perhaps. Seen this happen time and time again throughout my whole career. Not always, but often. And I saw it was happening in the early days here about 13, 14 years ago. And I really thought that unless I could come up with a solution to this problem, that we'd never really be elite. We'd never achieve an elite level of performance. And so I sort of racked my brain as to what I could do. And fundamental to my understanding of this experience was that it was quite hard sometimes for people to feel empathy to strangers. And I think we can all relate to that. Sometimes it's hard to understand a situation until it's right on your doorstep and something terrible is happening to you. I wanted to start something that was around empathy, around us getting to know each other better and really feeling empathetic for each other as a team. So I invented this concept called staff speeches, and it's very simple. There's a roster, and every member of the team is on the roster, and every week we gather as a team, all of the kitchen, all of the front of house, at 3:45 on a Wednesday, and the person who's on the roster that day has the opportunity to present a speech to everybody else. There's no rules about what the speech might be about. It can be about anything. People take it pretty seriously, so they put some effort into it. The speech might be 15 to 30 minutes. As they're making the speech, which is held in the dining room or presentation, they have the complete and undivided attention of the whole team. There's no phones, there's no distractions. That's not something that even has to be said. It's taken very seriously. At the end of the speech, everybody applauds and then has the opportunity to ask questions of that person. And we've heard speeches from, people from a great variety of backgrounds. We're really a melting pot of cultures here. At any one time in our team, there's probably 18 to 20 different nationalities. And so, we've heard speeches about very hard things, about being sexually harassed in kitchens, about depression. Many years ago, a team member revealed that they were bipolar, and I thought that took immense courage. We've heard constant sort of variations by our head chef, Matt Boyle, of his love of the Richmond Football Club. And he normally does sort of trivia sweepstakes, which are pretty funny. And we've heard quite a few stories about people's cats. It doesn't matter what it is. It's your time as a team member to show a bit of yourself, as much or a little as you would like. And by doing that, it allows that individual to not feel like a number, because there's nothing worse than being in an organization and feel like your very person doesn't matter. It does matter. So anything that an organization or a leader can do to make people feel seen in a small way, it really counts a lot. And so there's that. Then secondly, and perhaps more importantly, it allows a person to reveal themselves to their workmates, their colleagues. And even if, the person speaking is not somebody that you would spend time with out of work, not your favorite person in the world, whatever, there's generally something that you can connect on a detail in the story. And that might just be that, again, when that pressure is building during service and a mistake is made, and those two people that previously, said harsh words to each other meet again, they both remember that they both love cats, or they both love dogs, or they've both suffered from depression before, or whatever it might be that people are prepared to share. There's a connection. And because of that, we saw a massive decline in that type of communication. We just became a tighter team. We became a high performance organization, because, the second idea was that if we were more connected and we felt more like a family and we felt more empathy for each other and we knew each other better, then naturally that would just flow over to how we were experiencing the service and how we were servicing and taking care of the people that come to our dining room, our customers. I think that thing is most acute and probably most noticed by people that come here. Often people will say, why is it that your people are so wonderful? We say just because we care about each other, because we have the opportunity to do so. And yeah, it's really simple. So that's been pretty revolutionary for us. It takes us 15, 20 minutes once a week, and it's helped build a really strong culture.
It's a lovely concept that you've introduced, and we think there's a secret sauce to it, that there's something you're doing or have available to you that other people don't. And I think it's great that you're sharing to just show a sense of humanity, which we can all share each other, whether it's in a workplace or on the road or in the supermarket. There's a chance for us all to extend that to each other, a sense of empathy and understanding and a little bit of graciousness in our day.
That's it. Just be present with other people, hey,
Last question before we go, because you've been super generous with your time, but I'm wondering, just as a finishing question, Ben, about, your own perspective and positive psychology. How do you keep bringing your best to every day. There's a lot that, you're a business owner, you're a leader of other people, you're a chef. There's lots of demand of you, a dad, a parent, partner. How do you manage all of that and keep a positive outlook and perspective to your days?
Well, probably first and foremost comes from a really strong sense that this is my obligation. This is what I willingly accepted when I took on these roles. So put aside a bad day or something that's stressing me out, I still have this obligation to all of these people in my life. That's not to say that I necessarily need to bury everything that I'm experiencing or feeling, but I really feel the strongest sense to be a positive role model on a daily basis, no matter what. And how I sort of keep myself mentally fit is kind of simple. I'm around great people. And so that side is pretty easy. I've learned how to build a team of positive others, and so I don't have to carry this weight solely, because there are a lot of other examples in our business people who just are awesome. I've chosen great friends. I think that's a skill. Incredibly supportive friendship group. I have an amazing partner, Kylie. I've got 3 inspiring children. I think that I'm a person that needs to be around things that create a sense of awe and joy pretty constantly, whether that be art or whether that be in the natural environment. I surf 3 times a week as a minimum. I always feel better after that. No matter sort of whatever the problems I'm experiencing are, I go into the ocean and afterwards they just seem so much more minor. So there's something in that. It's a really basic thing, but I eat really well. I haven't always. I've been a terrible eater. I'm one of the worst eaters that you would ever talk to because of my occupation and because of my compulsive and obsessive nature. I haven't had a great relationship with food, but in the last year, I've for the first time in my life at 48 years old, finally, I feel like I've got a really good relationship with food and a handle on it, and that has made me feel heaps better. I'm glass half full, that helps. But taking time to have sort of some great experiences, being around tremendous people, and probably just something that really helps me stay sort of mentally fit, if that's the right word, is to not sit and smolder on issues. I will try to deal with them succinctly and fairly quickly, whatever it might be. I would like to fix them. I would like to try to fix them. I would like to put some things in place so they don't happen again, and then move on. Not forgetting them, but move on, and that sort of allows you to sort of stay in a positive mindset and view the problems in life that we will all face, that we all experience, in a slightly more positive light rather than always being so terrified of them, and certainly for the better part of my life and my career, I was more scared of them. And now I just understand that it's the definition of life problems, that we're going to have lots and lots of them. And it's not if you'll have them, it's when and how you're going to overcome them and who you'll overcome them with. When you have an issue, you're having a hard time, it's so easy to feel like you're the only person that's going through it. And I've just so many times I've felt like that. I'd love for people listening to just know that, everybody's having a difficult experience, even if it doesn't seem like that they are, whatever problem that it is, somebody's been through it.
Thank you. I appreciate the time, Ben. It's a wonderful conversation. It's a brilliant book that we'll put in the show notes to the podcast for people to get to and contact you, and of course the restaurant. So thank you. I hope you found the conversation equally enjoyable, but I've really enjoyed it. Appreciate it so much.
Thank you so much, Andrew. Thanks for your kindness and your support.
Two quick things before we wrap up. If you've enjoyed this episode and want to access the full list of show notes or explore some other episodes, simply visit andrewhorsfield.com. And please consider forwarding this episode to someone that you think would benefit. It will not only be appreciated by the person you choose, but help spread the word and amplify the impact I'm trying to make for the podcast. Thanks for listening.